Yeah, thank you very much. And I'm very excited to welcome conceptual artist, writer, and experimental philosopher Jonathon Keats on the stage, who will shed light on the sensing capabilities of a very peculiar organism, the slime mold, and in how far these organisms could be involved in policy making. Please help me welcome Jonathon. Jonathon, as a conceptual artist, you have choreographed a ballet for honeybees, opened a photosynthetic restaurant for plants. You are developing recipes for culinary adaptation, like we learned yesterday in your talk, and you are currently investigating alternative methods of timekeeping by taking the flow rate of a river as an outset. And in your role as a consulting philosopher at Earth Law Center and visiting scholar at San Jose University, you are engaging in the subject of decision-making systems and visions of multi-species governance. For example, by considering if stress hormones of human and non-human organisms alike could serve as indicators for a necessary change in the political landscape. And also yesterday at the Biotopia festival, you set up a slime mold think tank, an interactive workshop where a group of people worked with plasmodial slime molds to develop policy recommendations for the German government. This sounds quite challenging, and I'm very curious how this all worked out. But first of all, let's start with the question, what are slime molds and what got you interested in slime molds?
Slime molds are remarkable organisms that in one stage of their life cycle become superorganisms in the sense that many nuclei, each of which is genetically distinct, all become part of the same body. And as a superorganism, these slime molds have the ability to explore their environment in search of food. And they do so in ways that are extraordinarily intelligent, extraordinarily adapted to the problem of finding food in a complex environment such as a forest floor. But as it turns out, that can be translated in myriad ways into problem solving of different kinds. And I first came across slime molds in terms of becoming deeply interested in their worldview, so to speak, when I started to read about experiments that involved mapping out the United States or the UK, for instance, using oats. Oats are a delicacy if you're a slime mold. And when you place oats in a petri dish in a configuration that is the same as or that maps out the cities in the US, for instance, where you have more oats where the cities are larger, what you find is that this amoeboid plasmodium, this slime, spreads out in a way that is able to feed on all of the oats. And the way in which it spreads is identical to the US highway system, or actually not quite. It's slightly better. And so that got me thinking about slime molds in terms of how they sense and process their environment. And especially because I had in some of the news coverage of this work, which was happening over the past decade or so, there were a number of flippant comments about how they could replace civil engineers. And to me, that seemed like it was missing the point in the sense that it was simply concentrating on what was an elegant experiment that served to show a much deeper sort of process that the slime mold was undertaking, which I see as being economic. That is to say, that the slime mold is working out for a complex environment an optimal way in which to be able to exploit the resources in that environment. And to do that requires a certain form of reasoning that was very much what was motivating the scientists led by Andrew Adamatsky, for instance, at the University of the North of England, that these scientists were interested in looking at what he has called unconventional computing. But to me, it was really interesting not so much as a model for computing, but rather as potentially a means by which to access the experiential realm, the lived reality of a manifestly different species, but a species that I think can be an inspiration to all of us, in the sense that we also are superorganisms by virtue of the fact that we are so connected technologically, but we are not really, in evolutionary time, evolved to be able to cope with the consequences. Just think of what happens on Facebook. So by looking to these superorganisms that have 500 million years or more of experience as superorganism, and by looking at the problems that we face as a society, where really these problems affect all of us, and where all of us not only include us as humans, but us, all life forms and living systems, that slime molds might provide us with a model for being able to think more broadly and more wisely, and also potentially they might just be the ideal policy advisors in a world where we can't seem to make any good decisions or any decision at all on our own.
So that's interesting. So a slime mold, as I learned, is a very simple life form. It's a yellowish, slimy mass, actually, if you look at it. And it doesn't have a brain, but it's employed by scientists worldwide to, for example, form complex networks. There's also a huge DIY community building elaborate mazes for the slime mold to navigate. There are slime mold challenges. Where can slime molds be found? In the forest? Like, could we go in the forest around Munich and maybe we find a slime mold there?
I was just in Zurich before coming here and was hoping to find some. I was interested to see what Swiss slime molds might have to say about German policy, but I couldn't, most likely because it was too cold. So it really is a matter of being in the right place at the right time, or going to your local biology supply house, which is where we were able to source the slime molds that Martina Brunner, who assisted me with a workshop yesterday, that she was able then to cultivate such that we had a population. We had these plasmodia that we could then work with, that we could collaborate with.
Mm-hmm. And in 2017, you co-founded the world's first academic program for non-human species at Hampshire College in Massachusetts, called the Plasmodium Consortium, which we see here in the back, with plasmodial slime molds being the first scholars in residence. So I'm wondering, how does it operate, this consortium, and what are its goals? And where does the slime mold reside here in this scenario?
Yes, this is sort of the official public-facing part of the operation, and by the way, is no longer in place, unfortunately. Hampshire College, for all that the school has been extremely adventurous intellectually, has not been faring so well financially, perhaps because they have not brought slime molds into the administration yet.
Mm-hmm.
The slime molds actually do not like the light, and so they got the faculty office that no other faculty wanted in the basement. And they also were given student research assistants. And over the course of a year, we were able to collaborate with them. We also had faculty involved in this, and we were able to collaborate with them to be able to model problems that humans grapple with and have been unable in many cases to resolve, to put those problems in terms that a slime mold might be able to make sense of, and to provide us with some insight that is manifestly not human. So first of all, because slime molds are not us, they don't have our biases. I'm sure they do have biases. I'm sure that they are like us, mired in all sorts of issues of their own. But when it comes to human policymaking, they are free of a lot of the prejudices that get in our way. And also, because of that, there is the potential that where we tend to look at each other with a great deal of skepticism or scorn if we disagree. It's hard to disagree with a slime mold because, well, where do you begin?
Mm-hmm.
So what we did was we worked on, as you can see on screen right now, one of the problems that in 2017, 2018 in the US was particularly in the news, still is a huge challenge there as well as here, which was border policy. So basically, there are two competing hypotheses, one of which is that what we have is better and keep your hands off. The other one is we're all better off if we're able to get along and to collaborate and to share resources. So what this did was to look at conditions where two nation states each have resources in different concentrations, as is always the case. In the case of slime molds, the resources that count are not oil or copper or uranium, but rather protein, carbohydrate. So what we did was we distributed those in unequal proportions on both sides of the Petri dish and had one version where there was a wall in between that was maybe not as beautiful as the one that Donald Trump had in mind, but it was definitely very efficient at blocking slime molds that are extraordinarily clever at getting through or around everything. And in the other case, it was open. And so what we found was that in the case of a closed border, the slime mold sporulated, which is basically what a slime mold does when times get so bad that they simply wait for things to change by going dormant, essentially. Mm-hmm. Whereas in the case where the border was open, not only did they thrive by fusing, but they especially were able to thrive in the border zone. So what we did then was to translate that, having translated this very human problem into terms that make sense from the standpoint of a slime mold, and modeling that and simplifying it, which is often a way in which to discover hidden assumptions and to think about problems in unexpected ways. We then translated back to the human world I wrote letters to officials ranging from the Secretary General of the United Nations to the then President of the United States, Donald Trump, as well as the Department of Homeland Security, advising that the walls that had been erected be removed and that parkland be placed where the walls had previously been found.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. But to sum this up, there are a few steps like in communicating with or engaging with slime molds in this process. And the first step is actually modeling a problem, finding ways of actually expressing the problem with oat flakes in a Petri dish. Is that right?
We in this case, we're using in liquid form. We were, at least for some of the experiments, using a pure form of protein and of carbohydrate. There are many different attractants and repellents that can be used that were available for purposes of modeling numerous circumstances, numerous problems, including the question of legalizing marijuana, for instance, where we use valerian root. Valerian root, from the standpoint of a slime mold, is really attractive and has absolutely no nutritive value whatsoever. Mm-hmm. So there have been experiments that have been done in the past that had shown that if slime mold are given a choice between food and valerian root, they will choose the valerian root and it will kill them, ultimately, from malnutrition. But what we were interested in was the question of a scenario in which marijuana is legal, whether it's a gateway drug, which is often called in a way that is often used, which is to say a gateway to harder drugs, or whether it potentially is a gateway from those harder drugs to a life that is more healthy all around. And so we were able to use the Valerian root in, again, a model system that very much was a simplification and also was a translation that required translation back again. And all of that is, to me, as important is in the case of trying to consider problems that we face, as was the insight, which, by the way, was that marijuana should be legalized. We communicated this to Jeff Sessions, who was the Attorney General at the time. He did not respond. This is, I think, good as advice, but I think that it's even more significant at that meta level. The meta level of being able to see ourselves from outside of ourselves, even though we cannot get into the worldview of the slime mold, we nevertheless have to get out of our own to some extent in order to be able to meet slime molds somewhere in a realm where there's some possibility of communication or of coordination or of contact. That then becomes a basis for being able to see ourselves from a different vantage, but it also becomes a means by which to achieve a certain sort of an empathy across species, where, especially where those problems that we're facing are ecological in nature, which really all problems are, some just more obviously so, that those might be informed not only by the slime mold, but by the fact that we have a sense of the slime mold as being part of the same larger system, the world system, that potentially can come to some sort of a collective wisdom in terms of deciding what is best for all, what's in the best interest of all.
Mm. Just to get back to this way of finding ways of interacting with the slime mold, it's a lot about learning how the slime mold would behave and what it responds to, actually. So what are other stimuli for a slime mold? You said nutritive value is definitely one. Like, would it react to music or odors or temperature changes? What can be like lures for slime molds to move in a petri dish or to respond to my problems in that sense?
So chemotaxis, or detection of chemicals, is one of the senses that slime molds have with extraordinary sensitivity, such that they're able to detect volatiles that are produced by numerous compounds. In terms of compounds that you might use, and I would and will encourage all of you to bring slime molds into your realm as a matter of having not only personal consultation, and they're cheaper than most psychologists, but also to be able to participate in political decision-making informed for yourself by your own experimentation, your own modeling, that then can inform the decisions that you make individually and communally. You can use as attractants numerous sources of food, where what's even more interesting is that if you take carbohydrate and protein, which are both necessary for a slime mold, what's optimal is 2 parts protein for 1 part carbohydrate. And if you put both of them in a petri dish, the slime mold, unlike many people, will perfectly distribute itself such that it's able to optimize where there's more body mass in the area where the protein is found, and therefore taking in more protein. In terms of repellents, caffeine, I don't understand that. I'm rather attracted. Mm-hmm. There's also quinine. Again, I rather like tonic water, but to each his own. And then salt, light, and slime molds are, well, to anthropomorphize, which one should not, they're kind of lazy in the sense that they will avoid a gradient. If they can possibly avoid climbing, they will. So that's yet another case. They're also able to detect where they've been and also where other distinct plasmodia have been, which helps in terms of foraging, basically so you don't forage in the same place twice, but also where time is a factor, so that over time that trace is no longer so present, so that a slime mold might search the same place later on, or later on is long enough that there might be something different there. So that's just the starting point. There are numerous, and every time that scientists start to work with slime molds, they find more examples that can potentially be means by which to model our problems and more generally to be able to understand their world.
Mm-hmm. And as I said yesterday at the festival, you were installing a think tank with maybe some of the participants are already here, of the human participants. I don't know if you brought a slime mold today, but this was one of the scenarios that was modeled there. Do you want to explain this briefly for us?
So we're just at the beginning. We do not yet have results. Generally speaking, slime molds will take maybe 72 hours or even longer than that for results such as what you saw in the border policy experiment. Here, what we did was we had 3 groups that each were proposing problems, developing protocols, as well as models, as well as interpretive frameworks to be able then to provide advice to governments as well as the public. This was a case in which there was an exploration of transitioning to alternative energy sources, where the effort to do so was translated into, as I alluded to earlier, the fact that slime molds will avoid climbing if they can possibly do so. Metabolically speaking, you're spending more energy, so it just is something that you don't want to do unless you need to. So that was a way in which to be able to model the effort, where at the top of the dish are oats, and at the bottom of the dish are oats that are combined with pollutants, or rather with deterrents. I believe quinine was used. So that basically what you're looking at is on the bottom, the consequences of not making the effort and having an increasingly toxic world. At the top, where the toxicity is overcome with effort. And the question being asked is whether the effort is worthwhile for individuals in terms of the decisions that they make, as well as for governments in terms of policies and decisions in terms of where resources are used, and in terms of how regulations are manifested in governance at all levels, from the municipal to the federal. So this, when we have results, we will communicate them to the Reichstag as well as to other governmental bodies. And ideally, we will be able to continue through Biotopia, though Biotopia may not know it yet, to have slime molds in residence to be able to continue this process of providing policy advice for Germany and for the world. And I think crucially, what was different in this case from what we did in the US was not only that it was in a different place, but we condensed to 2 hours what we did in a year at Hampshire College. And why that's important is not only that there are more problems coming every day, and we better start to figure out how to accelerate action to be able to address them, but also that this serves as a model by which more people can get involved. I think that we've gotten to the stage now where it's relatively easy to stage these workshops, or even to provide the protocols such that anyone anywhere can do this. And that's really what I'm hoping will be the next stage, will be that anywhere you go, there will be slime molds in residence. And I should say, by the way, that slime molds are remarkable, but they are no more remarkable than any other species, including you and I. That is to say that I think that in all cases, there's much to be learned. And in all cases, it is essential to meet those organisms or those living systems in some common space, and to learn how to ask questions and how to enter into dialogue is an essential development that humans need in terms of individually and our society, what we need to do in order to be able to get on in the world at a planetary scale, given that we are already, in terms of the destructive force that we are, we are destroying so much at a planetary scale.
Well, this brings me to another question or thought, maybe, or you are referring to all these experiments, or you are calling them thought experiments, actually, which is, I think, quite a catching title, and also brings to light that it's actually that they are mostly are provocations also for our ways of thinking. And I wanted to ask you, like, where do you think do these thought experiments unfold their biggest impact? Like, is it really the goal to convince officials, governments to act in a different way, or is it actually in provoking empathy, raising curiosity about these organisms? Like, can you tell us more about that?
The answer is yes, and.
Mm-hmm.
So I believe that provocation is essential as a way in which to get us out of our stupor, to get us out of our complacency. I think that thought experiments, which I take from philosophy, which is my background, but which I misuse, at least as they are done in the philosophical realm, by not attempting to argue through a counterfactual, which is typically what a philosopher will do. Basically, you're trying to persuade. Instead, what I'm trying to do is to explore. I'm trying actually to undertake an experiment by positing an alternative reality that we can enter into together, that we can explore together, and that we can then use that as a way in which to inform the world in which we live, where we might potentially take from that alternative reality some attributes that we find to be valuable or not. And it may well be that everything that I'm doing is absolutely foolish. Most likely it is. But even if it is foolish, I think that the act of going into this alternative space brings a perspective on the world in which we live and our assumptions. So I do think, based on what I've seen, that there is great potential for us to bring other species into decision-making processes, and there is, ethically speaking, that we need to do so. Because we share the world with them, they share the world with us. We do not have the right to make decisions for them, nor to destroy the environment in which they live. We need to find new ways. Whether the ways that I have been exploring, which involve, in this case, modeling human problems for slime molds, but also, as you alluded to earlier, looking at signals such as stress hormones and measurement of stress by phenology, basically by looking at, for instance, whether plants are flowering earlier or later in the year as a way in which to be able to monitor how stressed they are, by using that as a way in which they might be able to vote, to be able to enfranchise them in political decision-making processes. I do believe that the enfranchisement needs to take place. I do not in any way advocate anything that I do as being the way in which to bring that about in terms of a vote in the case of looking to phenology, or a sort of a department or division of government that is engaged in policy making in the case of the slime molds. I have no idea whether these actually work out. That's why I think it's worth doing this. And that's what we're trying to do right now. I think that whatever outcome there is, we end up with heuristics, we end up with knowledge, we end up with new premises, and we end up also in a state of confusion that is generative. Curiosity is a generative form of confusion, is a form of letting go, is a way of entering into a state of not knowing, which to me is why I got into philosophy and why I got out of philosophy, only then to come back in through the back door of conceptual art, which may or may not be what I do. I really don't know. I call myself an experimental philosopher because I have no idea what that means. And it's a way in which to wake up every morning and to find my way. But what I'm interested in is how we can explore the world in which we live collectively in ways that are open to all possibilities. And by those means, to nurture the curiosity that is so essential to us, that makes us human, and that I believe also makes slime mold, but also to use these as use this as a means by which to become wiser in terms of what we do. So while there is an absurdity, perhaps, to some of these at the level of provocation, there may be some wisdom that emerges that we can then make use of. So I want it both ways, or I want it every way. I want to be in the thought experiment at the same time that I'm undertaking it and able to glean from it at a meta level some sort of understanding of what it means while also fully becoming a part of it. And in the case of this policy think tank, as the secretary of the Plasmodium Consortium, being as effective as possible in working with slime molds and building the best collaborative system that I can.
Thank you, Jonathon. I think time was unfortunately flying and we have to end this conversation, but I would like to tell an interesting analogy I came across between your work and the slime mold, because science has struggled to categorize slime molds. They are actually not fungi, as the name would suggest. They were classified as fungi. Now I think they are classified as protists, most of them. And in your wonderful monograph, Thought Experiments, which was published last year, Bruce Sterling, the science fiction writer, refers to your work in you as follows. Jonathon Keats is so far outside the box that mankind will never invent any box in which he can be at ease. So to anybody who got curious about thought experiments in Jonathon's work, I can highly recommend to delve into this monograph, which is really thought-provoking. I can promise you that. And thanks, Jonathon, for being with us at the Biotopia Festival, and we are really excited to hear more soon.
Thank you. It's been delightful. Thank you.